Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today what we're doing is we're back working on our 07 Cruisers Yachts 460 Express, and in particular we're going to be working on servicing the transmissions. Now that transmission is coupled to our Volvo Penta 8.1 GXI gas engines. In order to do a service, what I'm going to do is actually replace the filter. This is the filter for the transmission, and in order to extract the oil, there's a few ways of doing it. We're going to actually just extract it with this vacuum pump, and there's 3 locations that actually you can extract the oil from, and I'll show you all those. And to remove that filter in that transmission housing, you're going to need a 6mm Allen socket or an Allen wrench, whatever you have. And we'll go step by step on removing that, because putting that cover back on is a little bit tricky, and it needs to get done right, or it's going to be leaking, you're going to be sucking air, and that can't be a good thing. So give me a minute, I'm going to contort myself back to that transmission area, and then we'll get at it. All right, so here we are behind the engine where the transmission is. Now, one of the things that were caught, or I say were noted on the survey, was the fact that the transmissions have yet to be serviced. So what was noticed was this tag that's on top of the filter housing that says after the first 25 hours of use, the transmission should be serviced. The transmission filter should be replaced. And in all likelihood, with all the paint that's still on the transmission, that has not been done. So pretty much 375 hours past due, and that's what we're going to do today. Is we're going to service that filter that you can see that's just inside that housing. And you can actually, at the bottom of the by the prop shaft, by the V-drive there, you can see the drain plug, as well as over here you can see the dipstick tube, and that's pretty much where we're going to extract the oil from. So we're going to put the vacuum pump tube down inside that fill tube, and that's where we're going to extract the oil from. So here we are extracting the oil. You can see that the oil is coming up through the tube. Now, one thing that I did get mentioned on the last YouTube video for the reverse oil system change was that the engine oil was cool, so it did take a little while for the oil to get extracted. So same thing with the transmission. Is this transmission is cold. We are in storage for the winter season, so we obviously the engine oil, or the transmission oil, will be a little thicker because it's colder. So you know what, we're not going into the water for another 5.5 months, so there's no rush in getting this oil out. So we'll just take our time, make sure we get it all. Okay, so we've extracted the transmission oil, which I guess we pulled out about 4.4 liters of the transmission fluid. So for my American counterparts, that our liter is your equivalent to a quart. So for my American friends, we pulled out about 4.4 quarts of transmission oil out of the fill tube. So, you know, as I was extracting the oil, I was also thinking that we also got a mechanical survey inspection done on the motors and the generator before we purchased, and that was part of the agreement. What we did, and we noticed, we sent samples out for the generator. We sent out engine oil, coolant. For the engines and the transmissions, we obviously sent out engine oil, coolant, and transmission fluid. So the report that came back for the transmission fluid was there was a lot of particulate inside the transmission. So that pretty much indicated a lot of friction material floating around inside the transmission oil. So there was no metal filing, there was no findings of that. It was just strictly particulate. So the recommendation was from the testing, or I guess the lab, was to do a complete service. So that's the reasons why we're doing that. So part of that again was replacing this filter here. So other than the obvious, you know, that tag that says, you know, after 25 hours, the lab coming back and saying a full service should be performed. So that's what we're going to do. So before we pull this filter, you really should take notice of the way that this cap, this housing is seated on top of this transmission. So we see that sitting up a little bit, And we're going to put that back in the exact same way that we are finding it and before we do the service. So let's get at that and show you what that's all about. So this cap, like I say, has never been off, so it's going to be a little bit tight. See, it just cracked there. And what we're going to do, just loosen this up a little bit. And then we'll try and take this cap off here. So there we go. So one thing you want to see is you're going to see this O-ring here. And that's going to help seal it. As well as this O-ring here, that's going to be important. So inside that kit that comes with that filter, you'll see that these two O-rings are part of that kit. And then, obviously the filter. So yes, it does look a little dirty, a little grimy, a lot of particulate in that. So we're definitely going to clean that out. I'm going to put that back in there, grab a rag, clean that up. Okay, so I've cleaned out that transmission oil filter housing. I just want to have you take a look inside there. Now, at the bottom of that tube, you'll see a little rubber ring. That is non-serviceable. That stays in there. Alrighty. Now, one thing you want to do, take note, is that oil ring on that cap obviously seats against the side of that case. So you want to make sure that there's no debris in there, and there's obviously no paint flakes. So that would obviously prohibit that from sealing and then sucking air. So let's change those O-rings. Okay, we are back up top where there's a little bit more room to work. One thing I wanted to show you was this filter housing and how this works. So obviously, like I said before, down below was you've got this O-ring here. Now the way that works is you've got this Allen bolt that runs through there to the top of the filter housing, and then what that does is as you turn this Allen bolt, it now sandwiches that O-ring, and then once you sandwich that O-ring, it expands, and that is the O-ring seating that goes against that transmission housing, and that's why it's so important to make sure there's no debris or paint flakes or anything that's in there. Okay, so now part of that kit, you will see obviously a new filter comes with it, nice shiny and new, which is really nice, and I'll tell you which is the top and the bottom there. And you'll also get replacement O-rings, so you'll see the two O-rings. That O-ring here, the one that seals it, and then that O-ring there that goes in the top of the filter. Okay, now that is also very important. So a lot of people will say, you know, it doesn't matter top or bottom of that filter. Absolutely, it matters. Okay, so what you'll see is that O-ring will seat inside the top of that filter. Okay, now that is now sealed. Okay, now that is obviously the top, so I got lucky there. Now what you'll see is if that were the bottom, if I were to install it that way and try to seal it, that would not seat, okay? And you would never be able to seal that cap, okay? So that is definitely the top, because you will see, once again, that seats in there just like that, okay? So when you reinstall it, that's the orientation that you're gonna want. Okay, so let's get at changing those two O-rings. Alrighty, so let's replace these two O-rings that are inside this cap. You'll see that just by removing this Allen bolt along with that cap there, you'll now be able to remove this O-ring. Now, a good thing to do would be inspect that O-ring and see, you know, make sure that there was no damage or anything that doesn't look absolutely right. Now would be a good time to tell. And then before you reinstall this O-ring here, what you should do is just fully lubricate that. That's just going to aid in the installation of this cap again. So just for video purposes, I'm just going to put that back in there. Before I reinstall it, I'll make sure I take it apart again and lubricate that very, very well. Okay, and you see how that's seated. To replace this O-ring, just simply get a pick in there, and you're just going to want to pry that O-ring off of there. Alrighty, again, have a quick look at that. That looks fine. Put that new O-ring back on there. That's good there. Again, make sure that's well lubricated, and that will again go in the top of that filter, and that's going to seat it. Alrighty. Alright, we are back down in the engine bilge. We're going to reinstall this filter. So we're going to make sure that that sits in there nicely. It feels like it's seated. We've lubricated those O-rings on that cap. So we're going to make sure that that's seated. You feel that snap right in there. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to snug this Allen bolt, okay? And what that's going to do is that's obviously going to compress that O-ring a little bit, and we're going to feel that that gets seated. So we're just going to do this by hand. And then we're going to put the ratchet on, tighten that up a little bit. And then as we tighten this up with the ratchet, what you should do is you should see this lip drop a little bit, okay? You see that coming down a little bit there? So that way you know it's getting seated and it's starting to seal. So also, as we tighten this and give this a little bit of pressure, you're going to see this tab swing around to this housing, which is the way it's designed, and then that's going to allow us to compress that O-ring a little bit more and to seal that, okay? So as you see, yeah, there you can see it's starting to spin now. So we are compressing that O-ring now. It's now gone against that casing. It's not going to go anywhere now. We can just snug that up. And that O-ring is now compressed. This cap is now sealed. And you'll see at the very beginning of that video, that's why it's important to see how much of the shoulder is sticking out. Okay, perfect. That is now done. All right, so now we're going to move on to removing that drain plug on that casing. And you'll see that I've put a little bit of a catch basin underneath that drain plug. All right. Loosen that off with a 7/8 socket. Let's see. A little bit of oil. Very dirty. So that's what's left after removing all the transmission oil with the vacuum pump. So not much, but what you can see is actually very, very dirty. All right, so what I see I don't like. I see that there's a lot of either friction material, contaminants, particulates, whatever that's still inside the transmission casing after I remove that drain plug. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that drain plug out, and I'm going to add maybe half a quart of transmission oil, and hopefully as I add it, it's naturally going to push some of that particulate out. So that's what I'm going to do next. Okay, so I've got a single liter bottle of tranny fluid, Mercon, or actually Dextron 3. I'm just going to pour that in there. And I just want to see what it looks like. See, that's a nice red color coming out now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that drain cap back in, that drain plug back in, and then add the remaining of whatever's left of that liter, and then pull the plug again and see if any contaminants come out with that oil then. All right, let's see when we pull this plug. Ah, nice, good, clean oil. Okay, so I've gone ahead and re-added the transmission oil, the Dextron 3, the 4.4 liters or 4.4 quarts. And I'm just going to show you on the dipstick tube where that exactly shows, so you know. And I'm just going to bring it over that second mark on that dipstick. And that's good because as I start these engines, it's going to refill that oil filter circuit, and that's probably going to drop that case, or I'm sorry, that oil in that case probably about half a liter. So that's going to be fine. So that pretty much concludes the servicing of the V-drive transmissions. And before I wrap up here, I'm going to take a quick look at these output shaft seals to make sure that there's nothing leaking and everything is fine. So what I'm going to do is during the summer, I'm going to run these engines probably for about 10 hours and drop the oil again. I'm going to leave the filters alone. I'm just going to drop the oil, change that transmission oil to make sure that I get pretty much everything that I wanted to get outside of these transmissions. Alrighty? So, hope you liked. If you needed any information, I hope I provided it for you. Have an awesome day.